In 2013, a man sitting in a cafe in Europe checked his phone, saw an FBI alert, and fled the country. That man was Alexsey Belan, now on the FBI's Cyber Most Wanted list. Instead of facing justice, he escaped to Russia, where his story took an interesting turn. Like a shadow slipping through digital borders, Belan found protection from Russian intelligence officers who offered him a deal. Work for us, and we'll shield you. The partnership that followed would lead to one of history's largest data breaches, compromising 500 million Yahoo accounts and revealing how nation-states transform individual hackers into weapons in a shadow war that unfolds beneath our everyday online lives. The making of a digital phantom. Before Alexsey Belan became a name that would make cybersecurity experts shudder, he was just a teenager in Latvia with an extraordinary gift for understanding the language of computers. Born amid the economic turbulence following the Soviet collapse, Belan's early life unfolded in a landscape where technical education flourished, but legitimate career paths often led nowhere. This perfect storm of circumstances, brilliant minds with few outlets for their talents, created an environment where cybercrime became an attractive and logical choice. In 2006, when most other 18-year-olds were figuring out their future, Belan was already crafting his digital alter ego. Under the pseudonym M4G, he began making his presence known in the shadowy corners of the internet. The underground forums of Inside Pro and Zloy became his digital playground, where his reputation grew with each successful breach. He took a methodical approach. He knew that WordPress, a common website building tool in the mid-2000s, had certain flaws that made it relatively easy for hackers to gain information on the makers of WordPress websites. Just user data at this stage. He was helped by certain vulnerabilities in the programming language PHP. I'm going to pause right there and say if it seems like I'm trying desperately to explain concepts I don't actually understand, it's because that's exactly what's happening. If you're using this video to get tips on hacking or coding or something, firstly, weird place for that. Secondly, take everything I say, tech-wise, with a grain of salt. Anyway, he scouted Google and probably other search engines for companies, usually tech companies, that had websites and employed these vulnerable mediums, PHP and WordPress. He exploited the vulnerabilities in ways I don't understand to break into the company's servers, but as far as I can tell, only had the ability to see what happened in them and not actually take full control of them. This allowed him to gather more data, like email addresses and emails, as well as login credentials for the people logging in. He also gained access to internal company wikis, little company web pages that contain internal operating information that's not available to the public. Information like security practices and safeguards against cyber attacks. Obviously, there are safeguards for companies, so he targeted the ones who thought they could cut corners by not segregating internet-connected servers from the general network. If they had, Belan wouldn't have gotten anywhere. As it stands, he did get somewhere, and his catalog of breached companies grew, but not yet his wallet to any great degree. This was a methodical approach, testing a target's boundaries until something let him through. Like anyone entering a high-skilled field, Belan honed his skills on smaller operations first. Sites like Unishop.com, Nomakov.net, and Uniz.com became unwitting training grounds for the budding hacker. These were his practice runs, the digital equivalent of a bank robber, starting with convenience stores before moving on to major financial institutions. His attack on Lordmancer.ru, a multiplayer game whose security he dismantled with apparent ease, marked a crucial turning point. Gaming platforms contain payment information and personal data protected by security systems less robust than financial institutions, making them perfect intermediate targets for a hacker developing his arsenal. These early experiments formed the foundation of Belan's transformation. By 2011, he had evolved from amateur hacker to serious threat. Abandoning basic website compromises, he developed sophisticated methods for extracting user credentials and financial information. His WordPress breaching techniques earned him recognition among advanced hackers, marking him as someone with exceptional talent in an already crowded field. As his confidence grew, so did his targets scale. The Russian search engine Rambler.ru represented a significant escalation, comparable to targeting a smaller version of Google. The Ukrainian entertainment portal Bigmir.net followed, cementing his reputation as someone who could penetrate increasingly sophisticated defenses. Each successful breach added to the mystique of M4G in the underground forums where reputation translates directly into criminal opportunity. His rising profile made him both valuable and vulnerable, a digital outlaw whose skills became impossible to ignore. In these early years, we see the blueprint for Belan's infamy taking shape. The combination of exceptional technical aptitude, economic pressure, and growing ambition created a digital phantom moving between systems with increasing boldness, pushing towards targets that would have seemed unthinkable to the teenage hacker who first adopted the M4G moniker. Caught in the web, the FBI's hunt. Generally, if you're good at something, it's fantastic to get noticed, be recognized for talent. But when you're a criminal, that's a very dangerous double-edged sword. As Belan's attacks evolved from Russian websites to American tech giants, his digital fingerprints began connecting breaches that investigators had initially treated as separate incidents. After all, if a strategy works, why would you use a different one for each new job? Convenient, but ultimately a vulnerability. The full investigative power of the FBI was about to focus on a hacker who had previously operated with impunity. In 2012, Belan made a critical tactical error. He shifted his focus to prominent American companies with substantial resources and motivation to pursue attackers. His first major US target was Zappos, the online shoe retailer, followed by cloud note-taking service Evernote and document-sharing platform Scribd. These established tech companies, with millions of users, represented valuable targets and triggered an intense response that Belan should have anticipated. His American targets didn't just report the breaches, they demanded action, catalyzing a sophisticated digital manhunt. See, in the USA, corporations aren't just service and product providers, their lobbying power influences elections. Belan had provoked a very powerful set of sleeping bears this time. FBI cybercrime specialists began methodically collecting evidence from each attack, searching for consistencies that might reveal the perpetrator. Even the most careful hackers leave behind subtle patterns. Their preferred tools and coding habits functioned like a digital signature, as unique as handwriting to trained investigators. Digital forensics isn't just about finding a smoking gun, it's about recognizing the same smoking gun across multiple crime scenes based on the smallest details. With a set of crimes connected, the FBI went looking for who had access to the privileged information stolen and was attempting to sell it on criminal marketplaces. The FBI started gathering data on this mystery individual's various aliases. We don't have the exact details, but at some point, the FBI managed to connect these aliases to the real identity of Alexsey Belan via reuse of the aliases or slip-ups with IP addresses. Either way, playtime was over. The Justice Department moved swiftly as evidence mounted. By June 2013, they had filed 2 indictments against Belan, covering the Zappos Evernote and scripted breaches. The charges were substantial: computer fraud and abuse, economic espionage, and theft of trade secrets, carrying penalties of up to 20 years imprisonment. Identifying Belan was only half the battle. Physically apprehending him required international coordination. The FBI collaborated with European law enforcement, tracking Belan's movements across borders. The Department of Justice issued a provisional arrest warrant, while Interpol distributed their highest-level alert, a red notice, seeking Belan's immediate detention. The culmination of months of investigative work arrived in June 2013 when European authorities, acting on US intelligence, located and apprehended Belan. After years of operating in shadows, the phantom hacker faced handcuffs. The case seemed destined to become a textbook example of international cybercrime enforcement, proof that even sophisticated hackers couldn't evade justice forever. For a brief moment, it appeared the FBI had won. Belan was in custody, facing extradition to the United States. But what should have been the conclusion to Belan's criminal career instead became a plot twist worthy of a thriller. Somehow, the exact details remain murky, Belan managed to escape custody before he could be extradited to face American justice. While authorities prepared the paperwork that would transport him to the United States, he simply slipped away. The devil's bargain. FSB recruitment. Belan fled to an obvious destination. He was in Europe, and so was Russia, a country that had a bad track record on extraditions to the West. But his talents didn't go unnoticed. As they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Belan was the enemy of the West, enemy of the Kremlin. When Belan arrived in Russia in 2013, a telling pattern emerged. Despite an active Interpol Red Notice, Russian authorities showed no interest in detaining him and systematically rejected all US extradition requests. This wasn't mere diplomatic obstinance. It was a calculated decision that revealed Belan had found powerful friends in high places. Instead of arresting the notorious hacker, Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, approached him with an offer that would change everything. The specific FSB officers who approached Belan worked with the FSB's Center for Informational Security, also known as Center 18, the very unit tasked with investigating cybercrime and cooperating with the FBI on international cases. The very people who should have been hunting Belan were instead enlisting his services. The proposition they laid before Belan was straightforward: work for Russian intelligence, and in return, receive complete protection from American prosecution. This was a devil's bargain, trading his skills for a state-sponsored shield, selling his future for an illusion of freedom coupled with resources that individual hackers could only dream of accessing. The FSB provided Belan with sensitive law enforcement information, essentially insider intelligence on how Western agencies were tracking him. This privileged information allowed him to stay several steps ahead of the international investigators, changing his techniques whenever necessary to avoid detection patterns that might expose him. What Belan experienced wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a deliberate strategy. Russian intelligence has established a pattern of recruiting skilled hackers who face prosecution in Western countries. This approach creates a sanctuary for cybercriminals, willing to serve state interests while creating plausible deniability for the Russian government. Working directly for a state means you no longer go after your own objectives, and Russia had one in mind for Belan. Inside the Yahoo breach, duty to the state. That investment Russia made paid dividends almost immediately when Belan turned his attention to one of the internet's largest platforms. But this wasn't some easy target where WordPress flaws could be exploited. No, this target would take some clever psychological manipulation to trick someone inside into becoming an inside man / woman / genderqueer somewhere in the middle person. Enter the age-old tactic: phishing. Spear phishing specifically, where a hacker scours the internet for every last bit of publicly available information on some target employee to craft a flawless email that contains an unassuming attachment that gives the hacker entry. The attack targeted a, quote, semi-privileged Yahoo employee, someone with just enough system access to serve as Belan's first foothold. Like finding the one window left unlocked in a fortress. Once inside Yahoo's network, Belan moved with surgical precision, methodically navigating through the company's security layers, exploiting vulnerabilities that should have been patched long ago. Firstly, he stole tracked data for 500 million users, useful data for Russia on future targets. He then set about a few side hustles, including, allegedly, taking money from an online pharmacy to redirect anyone searching for erectile dysfunction to their site specifically. Anyway, he compromised Yahoo's account management tool, effectively becoming the bank manager rather than just breaking into the vault. With access to the AMT, he could make and log changes to user accounts across the entire platform without raising suspicion. He became an administrator with godlike powers within Yahoo's systems. What's truly staggering about this breach is how long it remained hidden. For over 2 years, Belan maintained persistent access to Yahoo's systems without triggering any alarms. It's like a ghost living in your house for years while you never notice the missing food or moved furniture. Yahoo's security teams went about their daily routines, completely unaware that their entire infrastructure had been compromised. On a side note, I visited a Yahoo site in researching this script, and my installed VPN service confirmed that the site was breached in 2016, 2 years after the 2014 start point. That fact is at least confirmed. The breach revealed catastrophic failures in Yahoo's security practices. Critical vulnerabilities went unpatched, detection systems failed to identify unusual patterns of access, and internal security protocols proved inadequate against a state-sponsored hacker. Even by 2014 standards, these were inexcusable oversights for a company handling sensitive data for hundreds of millions of users. When security experts finally analyzed the breach, they ranked it among the most sophisticated they'd ever seen. Unlike the smash-and-grab nature of many high-profile hacks, Belan's operation demonstrated patience, technical ingenuity, and strategic thinking. This wasn't just a hack, it was digital espionage on an unprecedented scale, combining the technical skills of an elite hacker with the resources and protection of a nation-state. Spies, targets, and victims. Following the data. The technical sophistication of Belan's breach served as the perfect smokescreen for what was actually happening behind the scenes. Ever wonder why a nation-state would invest resources in hacking a consumer email provider? The answer lies not in all 500 million accounts compromised, but in the few dozen that mattered most to Russian intelligence. While the breach's massive scale generated headlines, the true operation had two distinct purposes operating in parallel. The FSB officers weren't interested in ordinary users discussing dinner plans, they were hunting specific targets of strategic importance. Court documents later revealed that the FSB had Belan focus on accounts belonging to Russian journalists critical of the Kremlin, US government officials with access to sensitive information, and employees of major corporations. The high-value targets included a senior officer from a major US airline and a former minister of economic development from a country neighboring Russia. The stolen user database provided crucial information, recovery email addresses and phone numbers that allowed the conspirators to reach victims' accounts on other platforms. When nation-states weaponize talented cybercriminals, they create hybrid threats that are exceptionally difficult to defend against. These operations combine the technical creativity of criminal hackers with the resources and protection of state intelligence agencies, resulting in breaches that remain undetected for years, while extracting maximum value from compromised systems. Digital Shadows: The Legacy of Alexsey Belan. What makes the Belan case particularly disturbing is how it illuminated the symbiotic relationship between cybercriminals and intelligence agencies. This represents a paradigm where countries deliberately cultivate criminal talent to serve national objectives while maintaining plausible deniability. Through Belan, we witnessed how hackers' skills could be weaponized against specific targets of political value, all while the sponsoring government maintains innocence. This arrangement creates a troubling power dynamic. Hackers like Belan receive state protection from international law enforcement, while governments gain technical capabilities deployed against foreign adversaries without diplomatic consequences. It's created a new class of digital mercenaries, technically gifted individuals who hack with impunity, as long as they target foreigners and occasionally serve their protective governments. The economic conditions driving Belan towards cybercrime continue to produce new recruits across former Soviet states. These regions combine strong technical education with limited legitimate opportunities, creating a breeding ground for cyber talent that serves both criminal enterprises and state interests. For many young programmers facing similar circumstances, Belan's path represents a tempting alternative to limited local prospects. Meanwhile, Belan himself remains a digital ghost, likely still operating under Russian protection. Despite being one of the FBI's most wanted cybercriminals, he lives beyond American justice, a troubling reminder of how traditional law enforcement fails when nations shelter valuable cyber assets. His current activities remain obscured, though security experts believe he continues applying his skills in operations we haven't yet discovered or attributed. For you, caught in this shadow war, the implications are profound, but often invisible. Every day, state-sponsored hackers probe your digital life, seeking vulnerabilities in the platforms and services you depend on. The Yahoo breach demonstrated that basic security measures like two-factor authentication and regular password changes are essential defenses against threats operating with nation-state resources. Though you may never see this invisible battlefield, its effects touch every aspect of your connected life. Conclusion. Now that we've followed Belan's digital trail from Latvia to the FBI's most wanted list, what can we actually do with this information? Imagine waking up to find your company's most sensitive data exposed. According to recent statistics, 60% of small businesses close within 6 months of a major breach. Chris McNabb recommends companies implement rigorous segmentation of sensitive data and strictly enforce policies around information transmission. Two-factor authentication isn't optional. It's your digital fortress's first line of defense. If Yahoo fell to Belan's methods, what about organizations with fewer resources? The answer lies in preventative architecture, creating digital moats and drawbridges that even state-sponsored attackers struggle to cross. The main takeaway? Educate your employees as best you can on spotting phishing emails, keep vulnerable servers in isolation, and most of all, vote. Specifically for politicians who give us the best chance of crippling Russia with sanctions to force a regime change, so we can finally put Alexsey Belan and the rest, currently under state protection, to justice.